All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Dan, are you gonna give a bit of introduction there? How's it going?
Yes. Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a bit. Please note that this session is being live streamed on Facebook and also being recorded as well. So please just take note of that. We'll wait a few minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you. All right. Dr. Maattanen, should we get started? Great. Good to go?
Sure thing. Why not?
All right. Okay. All right. So let's get started here and hopefully my internet's holding up. But hi, everyone. My name is Dan. Welcome to another Lifestyle Med live event. See some new faces and some familiar ones as well. So thank you so much. So let's get started with our usual. This event is being live streamed on Facebook. So please do take note of that. And we're also recording as well. I want to say a quick word about our partners for this event. Again, I'm with Lifestyles Medicine. We're a nonprofit that puts on community-based lifestyle medicine programs to educate people about the principles of lifestyle medicine so they can prevent and reverse chronic diseases. So if you want to learn more about us, please go to lifestylemed.org. Also, we are proud to partner with Paradise Fields. Paradise Fields is a really fabulous organic farm in Hamilton, and their goal is to produce the world's most nutrient-dense produce and help others experience the power of plant-based food. So if you want to learn more about them, and if you're in the greater Toronto Hamilton area, you can check them out. Go to paradisefields.ca. All right, our clinic partner is Pathways Lifestyle Medicine Clinics. There are 3 clinics in Toronto, naturopathic clinics, and they're focused on helping people prevent and treat chronic diseases using science-based lifestyle medicine and natural therapies. So if you want to learn more about them or book an appointment, go to pathwaystoWholeness.ca. And 1 second here. And finally, we're proud to partner with the West Toronto Korean Seventh-day Adventist English Ministry. Seventh-day Adventists are recognized as one of the healthiest people groups, certainly in North America, and they put a unique emphasis on health and plant-based nutrition as part of their faith. So if you want to learn more about them, please do so at adventist.org. All right, so with that, I'm gonna soon turn it over to Dr. Pekka Maattanen. He's a associate professor at Burman University in Alberta, and he's also a scientist that specializes in the study of the gut microbiome. And as many of us here may know, the gut microbiome is a hot topic, and today's topic is titled, "Do you have the guts to fight disease?" And he'll be covering the gut microbiome, the gut health, lifestyle factors that influence the gut health, and kind of pertinent to our times right now, immunity as well. So Dr. Maattanen, thank you so much for joining us today. Really looking forward to the presentation. And if you have questions as you listen to his presentation, please put them in the chat box. And we will try to take the last maybe 15 minutes or so to take your questions. So we look forward to your questions. So thank you, Dr. Maattanen. I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan, for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to present to some of you here. Welcome. I'd be happy to see your faces if you're willing to show them. It's always fun. I know in class, I appreciate those of you who show your faces, because then I know you're there. It's harder to look at blank screens, but I'm okay either way. But I really appreciate that. So today we're going to look at, as Dan alluded to, do you have the guts to fight disease? Now, hopefully I'll give you enough detail to get you interested, but also keep it to a level that's gonna make sense to you. So that is my hope. So I'm excited to present. So I'll dive into that in a minute here. I'm just gonna make sure I can share my screen. Looks like I can. So.
We see your screen.
All right. Are you guys able to see that?
Yes, we are.
Everyone's good? Yes, visible.
Yep.
Do you have the guts to fight disease? Anybody have any issues? No, you can see all right. Wonderful. So what I'm going to touch on here, and my disclaimer at the beginning really is, you know, all this talk is an educational talk. So I'm not here to give you medical advice. You have your doctor patient, please, you know, take what I say with a grain of salt, but also hopefully it'll be something that will educate you to understand a little bit more about how your gut impacts your health and your ability to resist disease. So my hope is that you'll come home with a little bit more power in your own, how do we say, arsenal to be able to decide what kind of healthy lifestyle choices you might take. So, and most of these things, I think your doctor would recommend too, but it's always important that you talk to them about it, because every person is an individual, right? So continue from here. My main outline, because gut health is largely, as many of you may gather, is very much linked to what you eat, not surprisingly. Not saying that determines. Of course, your upbringing has a point to play in there as well. Your exposures to different things during your life. And then there are also lifestyle determinants. We're going to touch on these two key areas. And then obviously I can't be comprehensive in any way. This is more of an overview, but I hope that I'll give you enough to chew on here, so to speak. So first, I want to start where it starts. When you think about nutrition, you think of the beginning. So go back to the very beginning. Where did you get your first food from? Now, to be fair, you were already being nourished in the womb, right? But the reality is, once you're out of the womb, you start to ingest your mother's milk or formula, depending on what you're having. But mother's milk is a good place to start when we're considering what should we have nutrient-wise, right? What do we need nutrient-wise? Because mother's milk has been, how do we say, designed in such a way that it provides everything we need in the right quantities, in the right amounts, and also, especially for growth, of course, provides the right materials or raw materials so that the correct gut health will develop. And certainly the microbiome benefits from this. So what do we find in milk? What's in that milk? So there's a variety of things in the milk. Of course, carbohydrates, right, which is our main energy source. Lactose, you're probably very familiar, right? Lactose is in milk. You have fat in milk, 4% approximately. And then you also have protein. Notice how the protein percentage isn't really that high, but there is protein there. And the carbohydrates, the fats are there. Now, notice though, there are two different types of carbohydrates, and I want to focus on this a little bit. You have energy providing carbohydrates like lactose, and then you have specific non-digestible carbohydrates like human milk oligosaccharides. So you may have heard that milk contains fiber, right? Or maybe not. You never thought milk contained fiber, but mother's milk does contain fiber, and that fiber is a source of energy for bifidobacteria, certain types of bacteria that can benefit from that fiber and use it for energy for themselves. And in turn, they provide you with energy for your colon. So those fibers are metabolized by these bacteria into short chain fatty acids, which your intestinal cells can use. In fact, those are the only cells in your body that utilize energy from an outside source in the sense of direct metabolites from bacteria. Of course, everything we eat, sugar, glucose, that happens. But this bacterial metabolism is actually critical to provide energy for our colonocytes. So the other thing is fat, and I'm going to touch on that briefly today. I'm not going to talk because we could spend a whole talk talking about the omega-3 fatty acids, the omega-6 fatty acids, and so forth. But their fats are there as well. Pretty important, obviously, for brain development. Humans are unique in that our brain is quite small early on, but grows after we're born, grows a lot. So there's a tremendous amount of need for that fat early on during development. So this is just to set the stage. Now, looking at this, just to kind of narrow it down here a little bit for you. Dan, I think there's a couple people in the waiting room. I don't know if you're able to let them in because I'm seeing a sign that they're still there, but maybe it's just because connections are slow that they're not getting in. Anyhow, so as I mentioned, there are the polyunsaturated fatty acids. So that's one thing we may touch on a little bit. The protein, you'll notice there's a couple key proteins. And so this relates to our immune system. We have immunoglobulins, IgA, IgG, that are present. So there's this transfer from the mother to the infant directly through the milk of these different immunoglobulins, some of which are very important for developing that early immune system of the infant, and also providing protection from potential pathogens that might affect the gut early on. And then you have these carbohydrates, and we'll look at these oligosaccharides a little bit. So this is just, you don't have to memorize this, but this is an example of, in humans, some of the different oligosaccharides there are in the milk. There are many. There's quite a variety of specific types. And large numbers of this 2-fucosal lactose, for example. Now, none of these are digestible by us. So this is important because these are entirely designed for promoting the good bacteria or the bacterial populations within our gut to help them establish early on. So one of the things that you might wonder, well, how do we know that they actually help? What are they doing? Well, looking at the impacts of these human milk oligosaccharides in purified form to see, could they protect intestinal epithelial cells? So I had a picture of a shield at the beginning of the talk. One of the things that's important is your intestinal epithelium is a single layer of cells that lines your gut. It's not above it, quite a bit of mucus, and that mucus provides a barrier so that pathogens can't easily passage in. Well, unfortunately, there are certain bacteria that are really good at getting through that layer. and getting in and infecting the cells. And one of them is EHEC. So you'll see in this picture here, notice there's kind of like looks like a patio in the control. There's a picture where you've got those blue dots. Those are the nuclei of the cells. These are the intestinal epithelial cells. Imagine yourself looking down on a layer of cells of your intestine. And this is kind of like a patio that's got really nice tight junctions between each patio block, holding them together so that you don't get leakage in, right? What happens is when enterohemorrhagic E. coli or EHEC comes along, it disrupts those barriers, it breaks them apart, and it gets into your circulation, it causes inflammation, it causes, even in this case, enterohemorrhagic, you can cause bleeding, you can have issues like that. So you can see the difference, I hope, without me pointing it out too much. You can see the difference between the control and the EHEC slide there. Now, HMO stands for human milk oligosaccharides. If we put human milk oligosaccharides on these cells, you can see without any infection, they're looking pretty healthy and fine. But notice how resilient they are when you add the infection or the infectious agent, when you add the pathogen EHEC, almost unscathed. So these cells are protected in a large part by this purified human milk sugar. Now, this is independent of bacteria. So we didn't have bacteria there. We just added those human milk sugars. So interestingly, there seems to be some way, and we looked at this a little bit more, there seems to be some way that these human milk sugars, they don't just provide food for the bacteria, like I said, they also seem to signal our cells to beef up their defenses, to become, to make a stronger shield, if you will. So here's one way we could measure that. So you can actually look, we can take a fluorescent molecule that's quite large. It's not huge, but it's large, kind of mimics a bacterium, if you will. And that large dextran that has a fluorescent tag on it, if we inject it into a mouse, if it gets across the barrier, if you will, in the gut, we stick it in their mouth, for example, orally, then if it gets into the blood, for just putting that fluorescent molecule on top of the layer of cells and seeing will it drip through. We can do that in a process, just with this layer that you see in the image, or you can look at like trans-epithelial resistance, which is kind of the electrical sort of resistance of that layer. Is it actually solid or is it broken apart? If there's not much electrical resistance, then it's obviously broken apart more. So the HMOs seem to protect in both those areas as well. The thing that we found, and I won't go into too much detail here, but this is kind of what I find really fascinating, is it turns out these sugars that we find in the milk, and we'll get to the application for you soon. These sugars will enhance the production of mucus, okay? Certain forms of mucus. So the mucins that are present that line your intestinal epithelium, those mucins are really forming a nice layer that helps protect that single layer of cells from bacteria that could come and infiltrate. And what happens is those intestinal epithelial cells, in particular the goblet cells, which produce large amounts of mucus, they get stimulated to produce more mucus through production of, or the increased production of some of the proteins that help make that mucus. So in one case, one of these is PDI, protein disulfide isomerase. So I'm not going to go through the picture too much, but here's where the application to you happens, because most of you, I don't think in your mother's milk at the moment, you have been eating foods, right, since then. So what happens after weaning? How do we continue to promote our intestinal barrier? How do we continue to promote our gut health so that our overall health can be good? So this is where our nutrition comes in, of course. So what are we eating? What mimics those human milk oligosaccharides? And I think I don't necessarily have to ask the question, but I will, because I feel like I like to have interaction from people. what do you suppose is the dietary component that you need that is very similar to human milk sugars or human milk oligosaccharides that you can have in your diet that will help promote your intestinal epithelial function? Anybody want to shout it out? You turn on your mic, send it to me in the chat. Combination of fruits and nuts, milk from a cow, cow's milk. Actually, interestingly, people are bringing up cow's milk. Cow's milk actually contains much fewer. There are oligosaccharides in cow's milk, but there's a much lower variety. There's not very many. There's only about 2 or 3. I'm not sure exactly how many. In humans, there's about 30-ish plus different types. Yogurt, you guys are, okay, so you said combination of fruits and nuts. What in the fruits and nuts mimics, what is a sugar that you get in your food that you cannot digest? What is a carbohydrate that is undigestible to you? What do we call that when we eat food? What component of the food is that? Oh, Natasha's on the ball. Fibers. Fiber, right? Fiber. Now, there are different types of fiber. You have cellulose. You have, which is an insoluble fiber. But there are soluble fibers that you get in fruits, vegetables, a variety of different foods. And these are the foods that will feed those good bacteria, if you will. And getting the appropriate amount, in fact, getting enough of those is critical for us to maintain the proper barrier function, proper intestinal function. It might seem worthless, right? Why am I eating this huge salad? Or why am I eating all these berries? They don't have a lot of, fat in them, or, but the point is, they contain tremendous amounts of fiber. And fiber is important because you want to keep your microbes happy. Don't starve your microbial self. Yes, somebody said cow's milk is for baby cows, not humans. Yeah, so we don't need, actually cow's milk is in many ways, has a different protein content. It really promotes growth tremendously, quite rapid growth. It's kind of designed for that, as if you've ever seen a calf and how quickly it grows. It's incredible how fast a calf grows. So you don't need to be promoting that kind of growth. In fact, when it comes to cancer, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later, cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. So if you're promoting or giving yourself large quantities of protein, you're basically telling your body, grow, 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 when maybe you're not supposed to be growing anymore. Maybe you're just needing to be maintaining. And that excess material that you have is sending the wrong signal to you and giving those cells that might be, how do we say, on the edge of being cancerous or not, the ability to say, well, there's so much protein around, might as well grow anyway, right? So just something to think about. We can talk about that more later. So this is kind of an age-old principle. I go back all the way to Genesis 1:29. If you look at this, this is a text, but I think it helps us see just how old it is, how long ago it was given food for meat, right? A certain kind of food. What kind of food? Fruits, nuts, grains. So let me see if I can get just have to get out of that for a second. Okay, everything's being blocked here when there's okay, so I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, every tree which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. So these are supposed to be our foods. What is in the list? Fruits, nuts, grains, legumes. Vegetables came later, but basically fruits, nuts, grains, and legumes. So these fruits now, now depending on what you believe, but let's just think practically and simply here. If you were walking around and, you know, speaking of convenience, let's assume God made it so that everything was easy, right? Early on. Well, as you're walking around a garden, you will have trees that will have fruit hanging from them. Those fruits would be somewhere around eye level, right? Pretty close. You wouldn't have to like bend over down really far to grab or like reach really high up, because they'd just be right there, just grab, eat, right? Pretty simple. So this, I think that it's actually a very easy way to see, oh, those kinds of things that grow on trees like that, those are really good for us. And in fact, that is true. Apples, right? Simple. Apples, pears, other types of fruits, berries we find on bushes, variety of different nuts that grow on trees as well, right? Mangoes, you might like mangoes. Hopefully you, I don't know if there's anyone that doesn't like mangoes. And a large variety of other types of foods can be kind of easily grasped, if you will. What are some of the fiber-rich foods according to, you know, the canonical literature? If you talk to the British Nutrition Foundation, they will tell you whole grain breakfast cereals. So start your breakfast with whole grain cereals, whole wheat pastas, whole grain bread and oats, barley and rye. These contain lots of fiber. Berries, pears, melons, oranges, vegetables like broccoli, carrots, sweet potatoes, peas, beans, pulses, nuts and seeds, and then potatoes with their skin. So these are some examples what the British Nutrition Foundation would call high fiber foods. And there are so many. That's the nice thing. If you don't have to eat all of these necessarily individually, you can pick and choose because there are just so many different options for high fiber foods. So I just because I wanted to touch on, and I mentioned briefly sort of this idea that the microbiome of some of these fibers. So it turns out these non-digestible oligosaccharides or fibers, they actually regulate cell signaling. So we call this the host kinome or kinase signaling. So phosphatases and kinases, but just, well, I'll call it cell signaling. They regulate cell signaling and inflammatory response. We could see in these experiments we did that there was a positive benefit on inflammatory pathways. I'm going to touch on those a little more later when we talk about immunology a bit, and on the proper cell signaling to help prevent infections from happening in the first place. So cell signaling that stimulates barriers to form and have that shield to protect us from invading pathogenic bacteria that could come in through that single layer. So we took now, these are not the human milk oligosaccharides, these are now soluble fibers. There are two main soluble fibers we were looking at. One is inulin, the other one is short chain fructooligosaccharides or SC-FOS. These two could benefit the barrier in a similar way to the human milk sugars. So basically we're just showing essentially the same thing, but with these mature fibers, if you will, that you find in fiber-rich foods that I just talked about. So why is it, just to visually show you, why is it that this fiber is so good? What is the importance of it? Well, it turns out that, as I mentioned before, you have this layer. Notice that pink layer in this picture here. It's the layer of mucus, right? That pink layer above the intestinal epithelial cells. Notice they have kind of like hairy little tiny villi on them. Those intestinal epithelial cells, they have above that layer a lot of pink stuff. That's the mucus. If you have a fiber-rich diet, what happens is you're feeding the bacteria, and it turns out the mucolytic bacteria, or the type like to lots of food, right? Because you're giving them fibers to eat. However, because mucin is also made up of carbohydrates, believe it or not, in your diet, what do these bacteria do? Well, some of them won't do as well because they won't thrive. There won't be as many food sources for them. So the other types of bacteria may take over, but that's not the only issue. Those that are mucolytic, or those ones that eat up the mucus, they'll actually degrade the mucus layer. So now you start having less of a barrier. And now notice how all these bacteria are getting much closer, and they can actually start eating you, right? They can start getting through that barrier, getting into you. And that's an unfortunate thing. So you want to maintain that fiber rich barrier that can prevent the type of infections that you would see when the barrier breaks down. Here's another visual of that. Shows a little bit more detail, and also ties in a bit more with the immune system. So, for example, your immune system is a good thing, right? We're not at war with our immune system. We want our immune system to be functioning well. The issue is when it gets hyperactivated for the wrong reasons, or hyperactivated for the right reasons, but then can't shut off, right? So when we look at this layer of mucin there, it's keeping everyone happy, and you're not getting a lot of passage of bacteria in. On the right here, you see that certain opportunistic may skin once that layer gets thin. And then what happens is you get this these inflammatory responses, because as soon as you see a foreign invader, your body's going to be like, wait a minute, I don't want to see those bacteria there. We need to respond to this and get rid of them. So there's going to be a massive, I like to show this slide. The fiber, notice the fiber is shown on the left there, that's metabolized by the bacteria is turned into butyrate and other types of short-chain fatty acids. But butyrate is actually very important for priming the immune suppressive type cells. So it will tell the cells down there, don't worry, be calm. Wow, am I getting, you guys hear me okay? Am I cutting out on you? My video just shut off, so let me just see what's going on here. Now it's like my internet was unstable. Do you see me now again? Feel free to turn on your mic and talk to me if I am cutting out on you, because I noticed that this has slowed down from time to time here.
Yeah, Dr. Maattanen, your audio was cutting in and out a little bit. Maybe
Okay.
if you turn off your video, it'll help with the connection. You'll use less bandwidth.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, I can do that. So as I was saying, this butyrate, it actually helps to prime the suppressive immune cells, so that when there are the products of metabolism of these bacteria present, your body is very much saying, you know what, let's tolerate this. This is a good thing. We want those good bacteria around. In fact, there's a whole system, we won't get into too much detail, but there's a whole system where your body tolerates the good, healthy bacteria, doesn't hyperreact to them, whereas it reacts more strongly to the ones that are more dangerous to it, right? Makes sense, but sounds simple. It isn't really, because how do you know the difference between the good and bad bacteria, right? Okay, continuing on. Whoops, I guess I turned on my video again here. I can shut it off if need be. So yeah, please feel free to cut me off if I start cutting off, because I can't tell if I'm cutting out on you or not. Okay, so the main points just related to nutrition that I wanted to bring up here is fiber is that replacer for the human milk sugars, right? And fiber directly signals your intestinal epithelium to protect itself and dampen inflammation. Fiber will feed the good guys and keep them happy so that they're not eating your mucus layers. And then fiber feeds the good guys. They in turn feed your colon with short chain fatty acids, preventing colon cancer in part through epigenetic effects. We'll talk about colon cancer briefly in a minute. And then fiber will modulate the immune response, immune signaling, by actually upregulating dampening or upregulating the immune dampening subtypes of T cells, which are your T regulatory cells. So they help to kind of slow down your hyperactive immune action. So just to be practical here, because I know I don't know where each of you are in your own diet. I just want to kind of give you a couple of quick visuals of a meal, and then a meal with a little more fiber. So if you look at but let's just say this is a typical lasagna meal, has about 1,078 calories, only 6 grams of fiber. Does anybody want to venture, by the way, if you want to tell me, how many grams of fiber should you be eating a day, approximately? Does anyone know?
40 grams.
40 grams. Wow. Excellent. You are right on. 40 grams is a very good place to target. Yes. Good. So this is 6 grams of fiber. So if that's one of your meals, let's say your next 2 meals are typically the same. Pardon? Yeah, 40 grams was right. So if your lasagna plate here is typical to your other meals or similar to your other meals, then you're not going to get your 40 grams in 3 meals like this. You're going to be about a little less than half, right? 6 times 3, let's say you've only got 18 grams. So how can you beef up this? I don't want to say beef up because it's not adding beef, but how can you increase the fiber content of your meal? Well, look what's happened here now. All you've really done, you haven't necessarily changed the meal entirely, but broccoli has lots of fiber. The other foods have lots of fiber. Now you've upped your fiber intake tremendously here. And if you have another 2 similar meals, you're going to be well on your way to getting your 40 grams. So just kind of give you a simple example of how to do this. So now I want to shift gears because I've talked about nutrition and I didn't want to spend the whole time on diet. So I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about other lifestyle factors, one being exercise. So most of the time when you think of exercise, you probably think of, improving your cardiovascular health and getting stronger and so forth. And those are all very important things. But your exercise can actually have a dramatic impact on the gut and how it functions and whether it functions well or not. And now, before I go into that though, I want to ask you a question about exercise. Do you think exercise is stressful? What is your comment to that? Is exercise stressful? Maybe I shouldn't be allowed to ask you questions because you're not allowed to ask me questions yet.
Hello.
Anybody want to comment?
Could you
Yes.
hear me?
I can hear you. Now I can hear you.
Hi. Oh, sorry, my alarm.
No problem.
So I was telling someone the other day that I find gardening more peaceful than exercise, but exercise is okay. I just feel like if I'm actually like brisk exercising, like cardio, that's more relaxing than just having like a slow walk.
Okay, interesting. You find that more relaxing than a slow walk.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Some of us might have a different opinion, but okay. Good. The cardio, that's good. So excellent. So do you think though that exercise is stress though? I mean, just to answer the question, anybody have a thought on that?
It's not stressful. It releases stress.
It releases stress. Okay. So yeah, I think you're right to a point. I think we have to be careful though, because stress is not always bad, right? So while we think of stress as being, and that's a good point, that it's not, in the end, it's not stressful. In fact, it's stress relieving. But initially it is a form of stress. Exercise is a form of stress, but it's a kind of we call the concept is hormesis. If you ever want to look it up, hormesis is Hormesis. Hormesis. The idea of that a little bit of stress is good. So a little bit of stress is actually good for you. And yeah, I said just looking at what some comments are coming in here. Depends on the type, depends on what you're doing. Yeah, yeah, if you're enjoying what you're doing, it's not stressful. Some people say they like weights. So yeah, and putting weight would be a great example because you're actually putting stress on your bones. You're putting stress. It is a form of stress, but that stress actually indicates your body that there's a need for strength, right? So you will build up, for example, your stress resistance later. And that's the principle I want us to get across here, is that exercise, while it may seem, like, oh, it's a great healthy thing, it can be overdone. Okay, that's one thing that's important to realize. Stress, although most of us are not in that camp. So let's not, oh, well, I don't want to overdo it, so I'm not going to exercise, right? That's not the point I want to get across. But I'm saying that there is a possibility. And when we talk about the gut, I'm going to touch on that now. So yeah, somebody mentioned that blood pressure actually decreases after running. Yes, that is true. So you can get to the point where you have and you actually have a great endorphin response and your body feels much better. Your circulation is much better after exercise. There's so many benefits to exercise. We're going to talk about the gut benefits of exercise here. But I just wanted to, let me see if I can here. So I'm going to, this is a very busy slide. This actually is really worth reading if you're interested in on the form of exercise stress on the gut, and what are some of the mechanisms by which it works. Lucy Mailing, who actually hosted a virtual microbiome summit that I was just part of not too long, actually, I think it was last year. She wrote this paper. And what's interesting though, is if you're exercising, let's say you're out for a run, your body, your skeletal muscle system is using oxygen, right? A lot of your body's oxygen. And that oxygen use is taken away from other body systems. So in a transient sense, and actually within 10 minutes of vigorous exercise, you get a mild ischemia in your gut. So you have actually less oxygen coming to your intestinal cells. And this is okay, right? But you don't want this forever, okay? So you want to be wary. If you have ultra marathoners actually, and people who do even just marathons very regularly, they do often suffer from some forms of intestinal upset. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a form of intestinal upset that takes place in response to very, very strenuous, extensive exercise. And this is partly because you have that loss of oxygen. However, that stress preps your intestine by upregulating through heat, through increases in gut motility. I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you go exercise afterwards, it seems like you're ready to go to the washroom, right? This is often the case. So these benefits are huge. So if you look at some of these potential mechanisms here, we have, ischemia, being a little bit lower oxygen levels, heat stress, metabolic flux, gut barrier could actually transiently be decreased, but then be strengthened even more as a result of the response to the stress. You have a mucus layer that can be increased gut motility, impacts on hormones, the vagus nerve. What are the diseases that it could modify? Sorry, I jumped ahead here. A lot of different diseases. So obviously, obesity and cognitive decline. So if you're getting older, exercise can have dramatic benefits there. And you might say, well, is this really through the gut or is this just through other things? Well, it's a combination of things. So it's not just the gut, but the things we know that are happening our exercise actually does stimulate a few things. So what does it do? Let me just see if I can just want to get this out of my view here for a second. You can all see me okay. I just have so many other pains happening here. So what happens is, remember we talked about butyrate? We talked about that bacteria taking fiber and turning it into butyrate. Well, it turns out you actually get more of the types of bacteria that produce butyrate in response to exercise. This seems to be the case. You have higher levels of butyrate as a result, and that helps to improve barrier function. Also helps to lower the amount of bacterial translocations. Bacteria aren't getting through that barrier. It lowers the pro-inflammatory cytokines. We'll touch on that a little bit more in a bit. Inflammation being a hot topic now with SARS-CoV-2. And then what are some of the other benefits of exercise? You may have heard that BDNF is increased. Now, what is this? Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. What does that do? It can actually stimulate the stem cells in your brain to start replicating and start repopulating your brain. So you can actually turn up neurogenesis by exercising. It's a tremendous way to regenerate your brain and to keep your brain active and how do we say nimble? Keep your brain nimble. Your blood-brain barrier function is increased and decreases in depression and anxiety. Then you have your adipose and muscle tissues. You have increases in insulin sensitivity, more energy expenditure, of course, as a result of exercise, and decreases in inflammation. So there's a lot of exercise is one of those things we could spend the entire thing about. But I did want to touch on it because last time I spoke more about nutrition, but exercise can really impact your gut in some of these ways that you may not have thought of before. And those have a lot of other beneficial effects on your body. So I think Dr. Cho would probably recommend very highly to do a lot of exercise. I think he's an exercise trainer as well, certified. So, but I want to give you some caution, as I mentioned before. Marathoners and ultra marathoners have this leaky gut syndrome. So you don't want to overdo it. So now there's been some studies saying, well, what is the threshold? What's the optimum exercise amount without getting damaged, but still getting the benefit, right? So what could you do? And they're still working on these. But just when you think about the exercise level that you do, consider the intensity. Like I like somebody mentioned gardening. If you're gardening or if you're going for a brisk walk, those are types of exercises. They will still stress you a little bit. They'll get your aerobic exercise going, but they're not going to hurt you, right? So consider carefully the extent of how strenuous your exercise is. Now, I am not going to say that most of you have this problem. In fact, I would say the vast majority of us, our problem is we don't exercise enough. So I'm just putting this as a kind of a bit of a caveat there, that don't overdo it. So here's the more recent paper. Is there an exercise intensity threshold capable of avoiding the leaky gut? One thing that happens when you exercise, and this brings us into our next point, the more you exercise, the more you expend that water, right? Especially when it's hot outside. If you are not staying hydrated, that can really be an issue in your gut and otherwise, if you're not hydrated enough, because that mucin layer that we talked about requires, in fact, it's partially a hydration layer. It requires lots of water to keep it nice and thick and fluffy, if you will, because those mucins absorb lots of water, and that allows them to maintain that thick layer. If you lose that water, things will suffer. So that brings me to my next point, and that is dehydration, right? Not having enough water. But let's look at it on the positive side. Drink lots of water. What happens if you drink lots of water? Well, you will go more regularly, right? So that is really important. It may seem like a minor thing, but going to the washroom, how many times, I'm just going to ask this question to you guys really quickly here. How many times do you think you should be going to the washroom in terms of stool, right? Number 2, how many times should you be doing that per day, approximately? Does anybody have a guess? What's the amount of times? You can shout it out to me.
3.
3, very good. Why do you say 3?
Because it's 3 meals a day.
Right, every time you eat, get something out, right? Good, I like it. Yes, I think you're on the ball. Now I have to say, in North America, I think that we are quite, if you looked at the average, we are quite below that. In fact, the funny story was when my dad was in Africa back in the 70s in Nigeria, he was visiting and working there at a clinic for a little bit. And he had an individual come, a local person came and complained to him saying he was constipated. And he said, well, what do you mean you're constipated? He says, well, I only go 3 times a day. And so he was actually he's like, wow, that's constipation to you. That sounds a little bit extreme. So really, I think this is one of the things that, yeah, if you only do 2 meals a day, I suppose twice would be okay. But I think the important thing to consider is you need to have enough water to keep going. That's important. You all know this. When you're not drinking enough water, it's also harder to go. You get constipated. So you want to make sure you're keeping that level of hydration there. Now, what are the effects of the level of hydration? Well, it's pretty obvious that mucosal membrane layer is going to be nice and thick and fluffy if you have lots of water in it, because mucus, and I wish I could have shown you a picture of this, but mucus, there's something amazing about it. It's like a network of sugars that or carbohydrates that love to have water near them. So when you add water to dry mucus, if you will, it expands tremendously. And that's good because that helps expand that layer, helps keep things flowing well, fluid and so forth, and everything will just keep going on. So, if you have a longer transit time, what's happening is those bacteria, because a large percentage of your stool that's sitting in your colon is bacteria. Many of those bacteria are producing things that you don't want coming in contact with your gut for a long period of time. You want them out. So that's another point I want to make is when you need to go, don't hold it in, right? Get rid of that stuff. It's important because you're not supposed to hold your gut bacteria in you all the time. Your next meal can provide food for those bacteria there. You don't need to keep those other ones there for longer. So drink lots of water. How much water should you be drinking? I was just reading recently. Pure water. Oh, wow. Someone's asking me, what do you mean by pure water? Well, that's a question that maybe for another day, but I think if depending on where you're from, depending on the source of water that you have, reverse osmosis is one way to prepare water. Is if you remineralize it. I would say remineralizing is a good thing for RO water, but the very best water you could get is actually spring water. So if you have a spring near you that you can access the water from, I mean, that's the ultimate best source of water, is what I would recommend. So yeah, I mean, RO water is also, better than your city water that's full of who knows what. But sometimes city water, depending on the city, can be a lot better than bottled water, right? So be wary of those nuances. You may have to check into your own personal situation there. So I just wanted to touch on, so this is just kind of to give you the review of that layer. That water would hydrate and keep that layer nice and thick. That was the main point I wanted to show you there. And now if you look at your small intestine and your distal colon, you'll notice that there are these layers. There's in the distal colon, you have 3 layers, and here you have kind of just the 2 layers. But these layers of mucus, they're really important. That's the main take home I wanted to say from this. You want to maintain happy, healthy layers of bacteria there. Notice how you're not going to have as much population of bacteria in the small intestine as you will in the large intestine, because this is the major place. The vast majority of bacteria you will find are in your colon. And that's where they're interacting with things. And in your colon, you have stem cells and so forth, and they're producing a variety of different antimicrobial mediators and so forth. But you also have the potential in your colon, unfortunately, for something like cancer to arise. So how does and this is just, I'm just going to quickly mention as well in terms of transit time. This is just kind of an anecdote, but I think it's interesting. Is it's been found in actually populations of autistic children that they have slower intestinal transit time, and they have elevated levels of pericresol, which is actually a microbial metabolite produced often as a byproduct of protein metabolism by bacteria. And those levels are higher in their urine. So it's a sign that they're getting too much of these toxic bacterial metabolites crossing the blood, crossing into the blood from the intestine because they're not getting their bacteria out. So you really want to get that out. Now, I'm not saying that's a causal relationship. I'm just saying that they've shown this, and it's kind of interesting. So in terms of hydration, it's not just the gut that benefits, right? And of course, the gut is important for a lot of things, but this helps you regulate body temperature, your joints, preventing infections in general. So you wash yourself out. You notice if you get a fever and you're having sweats and so forth, you need lots of water to help stay hydrated. My sister was telling me she was working in the ICU with some actually COVID patients, and she said, you know, one of the biggest issues was these people weren't hydrated because they felt they're like they got so scared when they got the infection. They just needed hydration. They need lots of water, and sometimes that actually is enough to help, depending on the severity of the case, to help them combat and get over this infection. So improving sleep quality, cognition, and mood. Last point I want to make, because we want to leave a little time for, oh wow, we're going through time fast here. I'll just really quickly touch on sunshine. Sunshine is absolutely critical. Why? Well, it produces and it helps our skin actually produce large quantities of vitamin D. Now, of course, if we look at vitamin D levels, these vitamin D levels are actually tremendously important for having the adequate vitamin D levels are important for that barrier function as well. So that's the quick take home here. You don't have to understand it all. The main point is, even in IBS, they have noticed this very recently in a clinical trial. We were looking at this fermentable oligosaccharide deficient diet. In individuals with IBS, they were seeing that there were low levels of vitamin D in people that were having worse symptoms. So decreased vitamin D levels have been associated with a lot of gastrointestinal disorders. Low vitamin D patients showed significantly worse symptoms, altered intestinal permeability, as I mentioned before. Zonulin is one of these proteins that's important in that barrier, keeping that sort of those blocks of the intestinal epithelium tightly stuck together. You'd be losing that, and those barriers are no longer intact. So this was a study done very similar to ones done in the lab where I was in, where we looked at susceptibility to infectious colitis, and vitamin D deficiency really alters that and makes you more susceptible. So it's important to get your vitamin D. Now, what about cancer, right? So this is just a big picture of this. I'll touch on this because I know I want to answer some questions here too if people have. But you know, cancer has actually surpassed cardiovascular disease as the major killer, and it kind of depends on which province you're from. But I think for the most part across Canada, it's generally cancer. Somebody could correct me on that. So there are a variety of ways that our gut health can impact our ability to deal with cancer. In particular, our immune system's ability to get rid of cancer cells when they come up. So if we look at multiple body sites, there are a variety of gut-related metabolites that can benefit. So increasing, for example, butyrate, we'll start with that. Looking at butyrate increases your memory T cells and your T cell activity, increased lymph node development. So it helps promote that through vitamin A. You have tryptophan, which is found in some foods. Anybody know what good plant-based foods are high in tryptophan? Anybody want to make a comment on that in the chat? I can't see your chat right now.
Martin, some people are saying tofu, bananas.
Okay. Tofu, bananas. Oh, bananas. I didn't know bananas were high in tryptophan. Perhaps they are. Tryptophan is definitely, there's a lot of tryptophan in tofu. Pumpkin seeds, believe it or not, very high in tryptophan. Chia seeds, high in tryptophan. Flax seeds, also high in tryptophan. So yeah, lots of really good things there. So there's ways that these immune cells are being impacted through a variety of ways. And even in our bone marrow, we can have upregulation of a variety of like, for example, hematopoiesis, production of good blood cells can be promoted through metabolites released from the gut. So there's quite a number of ways the gut does impact our immune system. And because we're kind of short here, I didn't want to spend forever. I'm just going to quickly touch on COVID-19 because I know everybody's probably wondering, well, okay, if we're talking about infection and battling those kinds of infections, this individual, Andre Moret, I highly respect him. He's got some very interesting papers in the area of nutritional impacts on metabolic diseases, but also looking at specifically berries and certain fiber-rich foods and their impacts on the immune system and its function. So for example, as you all know, because you've heard it in the news a million times, so I don't need to tell you, a lot of the issues, the comorbidities that are linked to worse outcomes with SARS-CoV-2, you have immune dysfunction, you have high ACE2 expression, for example, you might have gut microbial dysbiosis, so you already have problems in your gut, IBD, IBS, low-grade chronic inflammation already if you have metabolic syndrome, obesity-associated comorbidities. As you're getting older, there's something we call inflammaging. So as you get older, increases levels in inflammation. Doesn't have to be, but in many people who are aging, they have these issues. And so there are a variety of different comorbidities. So what are some things that can help? And so this is just a panel. I'll just end with this as my last slide so that I don't take away from the questions, and then we can talk. So notice the polyphenol-rich food. So I didn't touch on the berries as much in terms of polyphenols. I touched on them more in terms of their fiber content. Polyphenols actually have direct interactions, believe it or not, with ACE2 receptors. Some of them have been shown to block the ACE2 receptor, which is quite fascinating. So that prevents this intake of the virus, which is quite fantastic. The other thing is you can have indirect interactions, so improving gut dysbiosis, improving your barrier function. That can reduce the low-grade inflammation that you might already be having, so then you're in better shape. Probiotics, of course, there's a lot of hype about those. Do you need to be taking probiotics? Well, if you're taking, my argument would be if you're eating high prebiotic-rich foods, you're going to be in a good shape there. But taking a probiotic is not necessarily the worst thing, depending on the quality and where it's from. Vitamin D we touched on already, so the barrier function again, of course, really important. Also seems to have tremendous impacts on SARS-CoV-2, and I think there's plenty of evidence for other viral infections that vitamin D status is important. And then polyunsaturated fatty acids, I didn't touch on in a lot of detail, but of course, regulating the inflammation versus pro and anti-inflammatory effects, especially the long chain polyunsaturated fats, like the ALAs, which are a little bit shorter than the DHAs and EPAs, but they can be elongated as long as you're not eating too many omega-6s. So with that, I know that I've kind of been talking a lot at you here, so I would like to, let me see if I can show myself now without slowing things down.
Dr. Maattanen?
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll just take a few minutes for questions. So let's just go with this one here. Can you explain again the role of short chain fatty acids in protecting the mucosa?
Okay. Yeah. So there's two roles. One is they are actually food for your colonocytes. So those, if you think about it, if you don't starve your barrier, then it'll do better, right? So that's the first thing. First, most obvious thing is giving food to the barrier. The second thing, which I didn't go into as much detail on, is when it comes to cancer, short chain fatty acids actually promote a type of metabolism which helps to prevent cancer. So some of you might be familiar with the Warburg effect in cancer. So the Warburg effect is where cancer loves sugar, right? Cancer loves to use sugar, and it's quite one of the reasons for that is because it doesn't have a lot of oxygen around, typically in the tumor, and so it requires lots of sugar because it relies on glycolysis. It's only short source of energy. Anyway, if you have butyrate produced, that will provide energy for these colon cells, and they never need to rely as much on sugars directly, and so they are going to be in a happy place without becoming more cancer-like, if you will. And there's some other mechanisms there. The other thing, okay, the third thing quickly, is they also influence the inflammatory response. So the cells, the T regulatory cells will be upregulated. So the anti-inflammatory or tolerance of your immune system will be upregulated as a response to butyrate. So butyrate makes you more tolerant, so you won't be as inflamed. Anything else? Other questions?
Yeah, maybe just one more from Justina.
Yes.
You had talked about vitamin B, and the lack of vitamin B had some kind of impact. Can you clarify that again with us?
Yeah, so lack of vitamin D and the how it directly does this is a matter of debate. But lack of vitamin D or deficiency in vitamin D has clear.
So I meant vitamin B. Vitamin B.
Vitamin B. Sorry.
Yeah, B. Yes.
Vitamin B. Okay, so that's a good question. I did not go into much depth on vitamin B. I think just in that last slide we briefly touched on it. Let me see, not the last slide, the one on cancer. Yeah, I did not go into huge depth on vitamin B, and in fact, I don't think I would be the best expert to speak on vitamin B and its impacts. I know that B12 is, of course, an important, basically coenzyme in many ways. It's critical for the function of a lot of different functions in our body. So B12 is something you need to often take in supplemental form, but it is produced by bacteria as well. So I have not gone into the vitamin B12. The only thing about, is it B12 that you're talking about, or which B? Because there's so many different Bs.
It wasn't specified. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Anybody? So B in general, the part that I mentioned, do you want to tell me where I talked about that? Was that more in, vitamin B2, it might have been where I talked about thymic immune system related to cancer. Basically, it's just increasing mucosal associated T cell numbers. That's what I was showing, but that was just a side note in that cancer slide.
Okay.
Is that the last question? Anybody else? I'm happy to take more questions if you want to stay. For those of you who have to leave, you can go. I know I went a little over time, so we had some technological issues there.
Dr. Maattanen, thank you so much. Yeah, maybe we can just hang around for a couple minutes afterwards, but for now, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, if you want to ask Dr. Maattanen some questions, stick around. We'll unmute you. But for now, if you do have to go, thank you so much for joining us. For those who watched on Facebook as well, thank you. And we do these every 2 weeks or so. So please check out our website, and we hope that you could join us for a future one as well.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a good rest of the long weekend. And again, if you do want to stick around, just we'll wait a minute or so and then just continue on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming.
Dr. Maattanen, we have a question here about
Yeah.
what do you think about sugar substitutes other than honey or maple syrup? I'm assuming it's related to gut health.
Yeah, so sugar substitutes, it depends. Stevia would probably be one I haven't looked at what effects it has on the microbiome, but I think there's, as far as I understand, no detrimental evidence of its impact. But